the argument is definitely there to say that Alexander Volkanovski could have won that fight and went home that night with 2 belts wrapped around his shoulders. So a rematch, I think, is definitely due for these two. And maybe not right away, but definitely in the future, that fight needs to fucking happen. Woo! What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Kevin Hoop Show. Do not forget, real quick, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button real quick. I would really appreciate it. Without further ado, though, we're going and talking about Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. But we're going to be talking about maybe a possible rematch. In my opinion, I think a rematch is due for these two. I honestly think it was a really close fight. I've seen even some people in the comments say that in their opinion they had Volkanovski winning. I think that Islam did win the fight in general when it comes to takedowns and whatnot, but when it comes to the striking, I do think Alexander Volkanovski had a big advantage and showed it. He had over 30 to 40 strikes, I believe, when it came to that. And when it came to the overall fight when it comes to mixed martial arts, I would possibly give it to Islam. He landed some good strikes and he had more takedowns. And a lot of people, I think, had it 2-2 going into the 5th round. In my opinion, Alexander Volkanovski won that 5th round, hence making it 3-2 for Alexander Volkanovski. Again, not trying to take anything away from Islam. I think there is a perfect argument that he was already up 3-1. If so, then I think that, if Alex won that 5th round, it would have been 3-2 for Islam. Either way. If a rematch happened, I think that the big thing that you have to take into account is that it's probably not going to be in Perth. Alexander Volkanovski isn't going to have that whole entire Australian fan base behind him. So maybe it's in Abu Dhabi, maybe it's in Vegas, and honestly, if it's in Vegas, Islam might have a good fan base. A lot of people, at least from my viewers who are somewhat from the United States and the UK, they're somewhat fans of Islam. So I think that alone goes to show that Islam does have a somewhat international fan base. It's not just strictly to Russia or Abu Dhabi. Then again, I think Alexander Volkanovski, it's the same way. I think it would be more or less 50-50, maybe 60-40 when it comes to a fan base split. But I think Alexander Volkanovski has a good amount of international fans as well, not just strictly Australia. But I do think that having, everyone boo Islam in Perth would definitely have somewhat of a factor in the ring, and it being somewhere else where he's not getting completely booed and the other guy's getting completely cheered on. I think that might be a factor going into a rematch. Another thing to put into account, and this is really stretching it, Alexander Volkanovski recently in an interview was talking about if this fight happened at 145, he's going to squish him, absolutely squish him on the ground. Now, I thought that was kind of ballsy saying that. Granted, I think he showed that he had good grappling, but I think that weight cut for Islam would be extremely hard for him to do. If it were to happen at 145, I definitely think Alexander Volkanovski has the advantage. No ifs, ands, or buts. He's just used to fighting at that weight and making that weight cut in general a lot more than Islam is. Now, to talk about some recent news and some speculation on the recent fight that these two just had, at UFC 284, Dan Hooker is coming out with some accusations that Islam Makhachev used an IV before the fight happened after he weighed in and to rehydrate. Now, for those of you that don't know, USADA rules and guidelines have IVs banned. You are not allowed to use IVs to rehydrate in any sort of way or use IVs at all in general. Dan Hooker seems to be pretty confident that Islam Makhachev cheated or at least used an IV. And if so, what does that mean? Does it mean that a rematch is going to happen? Does it mean that the win goes to Volk? I don't know. But I just think that that's a little interesting because why would he hydrate for this one but not other ones? Now, it could also be that Dan Hooker is a little butthurt from getting Kimura from Islam Makhachev back in the day when he fought Islam. If so, I really wish that he didn't do that because it just, being a sore loser, in my opinion. If it is true, I hope that, it gets dealt with the right way. And if it's not true, I hope that nothing like this happens again. But I think there was even a clip of Islam Makhachev. I don't know if it was him responding to Dan Hooker in particular, but he was doing this video clip on Twitter of him saying, Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy. And then his Russian training partners and his team in the back was like, Ozzy, 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 responding to him kind of like how Alex Volkanovski was doing at the press conference with the fans. And I just think that was a little trolly. And, whether he's trolling people or saying that he wants to fight Floyd Mayweather and saying Dana White signed the contract or get the contract ready for Floyd Mayweather.
Hey, Dana, I want a money fight. Give me Mayweather. Woo!
It's adding some personality, and I'm all a fan for it. Makes me more of a fan of Islam Makhachev in general. So keep on doing what you're doing, Islam Makhachev, because you're just going to be gaining more and more fans. And honestly, I'm all about trolling and getting people more of just kind of getting people like a little pissed off or getting under their skin a little bit, getting that rent-free headspace in there. So if, Islam Makhachev is trying to do that or just trying to, joke around a little bit, I think it's all fun and games, and I'm all for it. Talking about if a rematch happened at 155, though, I think that honestly, the main thing that we would see is maybe more of a ground game and more takedown offense from Alexander Volkanovski. You saw a lot of takedown defense from Alexander Volkanovski. He didn't really have a lot of level changes. He was mostly trying to keep the fight on the feet, and all to him. I completely understand why. That's obviously the strategy he had going into it. He knew Islam was going to try and take him down a lot, so he was working on different positions on the ground more than he was striking. And now that he knows what Islam kind of feels like in the cage, he's going to come with a lot more of a offensive take when it comes to the ground. I think he knows what to expect now from Islam Makhachev, power and pressure-wise. So I think that, it would be exciting to see how much takedown offense he has in a rematch if it were to happen. Because we all know the striking is always there with Alexander Volkanovski. Now, on Islam Makhachev's side, I think that he would come out with some better striking as well. I think that, he saw his output in striking, and that might show him that, all right, maybe I can, hold my own on the feet a little bit more. I knocked this guy down to one knee, and I got a couple other good shots in there. I got a cut on the left eye. I think that Islam Makhachev had good striking. I think the thing that Alexander Volkanovski said that was the most true thing about this fight is Alexander Volkanovski kind of underestimated him in the striking, and Islam Makhachev kind of underestimated him in the grappling. And I think that just goes to show what they were focusing on more in their camps. I think it went to show in the fight. And I think that honestly, with a rematch, you're going to see a refined skill in both of those aspects, in the grappling and the on the feet striking. So a rematch, I think, is definitely due for these two. And maybe not right away, but definitely in the future, that fight needs to fucking happen. Maybe not in 2023, but at least in the future, in 2 to 3 years before these guys actually hang up the gloves. Another big aspect I think is, kind of exciting to look at, or an interesting thing to look at when it comes to a rematch between these two, is what is it going to be like in the press conference leading up to it? What's it going to be like in the interviews leading up to it when these guys are talking to each other? Because there was honestly a lot of respect, but at the same time, there was a little bit of tension and overconfidence in both their aspects. I think Islam Makhachev always had a smirk on his face and was like, oh, you're small, you're not going to have a lot of power. And, Alexander Volkanovski was saying, I'm training for you. I'm going to be ready for you, and you're going to be underestimating me. And I think that aspect alone is interesting to think about now that these guys know how each other fight and what each other feel like in the cage. And I think that aspect alone is going to be interesting to think about when it comes to the press conference and just, how these guys kind of think about each other and the training camp that they choose to do when it comes to a rematch. I think that one could, take the other guy a little bit more lightly. I don't really know who necessarily, but I definitely think Alexander Volkanovski thinks that he could have done more and thinks that he overestimated and kind of put Islam Makhachev on the pedestal a little bit. A lot of people have that kind of mentality on Islam Makhachev, that they put him on this big pedestal, and just doing that alone, you kind of already lose the fight. Look at Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo. I think that that's the same kind of thing that happened where, Jose Aldo put Conor McGregor on this pedestal because he got in his head, and he's had so many good first round finishes and finishes in general in the UFC. And when it came to the fight, he already lost before he even entered the octagon. So I think that, a lot of fighters have that same sort of mentality when they face Islam Makhachev, because they already know that he's so good. If it comes to a rematch, Alexander Volkanovski, I don't think is going to have any pedestal for Islam Makhachev just because it was so close. I think that Alexander Volkanovski himself thinks he won the fight. The argument is definitely there to say that Alexander Volkanovski could have won that fight and went home that night with 2 belts wrapped around his shoulders. Now, I don't think these two are the ones to necessarily go out in a press conference and completely shit talk and badmouth the other guy. But, I do think Alexander Volkanovski could bring in and be like, hey, you thought you were going to whoop me in the first one and you didn't. So what do you think you're going to do in this second one? And just those types of scenarios in general, I think that would be really fun to watch and fun to see how Islam Makhachev responds, especially because, like I said, he's getting that trolley sort of personality to himself and developing as a fighter. So honestly, we might be a little bit more entertaining the second round, and it might be even more bigger and have more hype around it. So I think that it's very interesting to see how this rematch would play out in not only the actual fight aspect, but also the press conference and how these two would interact between each other in interviews, and how they answer questions about each other. I think would be interesting if a rematch were to happen. It was an exciting fight. It was somewhat close in depending on your opinion and your aspect of who you think, won the fight. But I think it was a very close fight. It came down to one round, basically going to one fighter or the other. And in that aspect alone, I think a rematch is due between these two great champions in their own divisions. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm right. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm fucking wrong. I dare you. I respond to all of you. I'm trying to be, the most open to anything, any aspect or any opinion. So let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen between these two. We got a watch party going live this Saturday at 7 p.m. Tune in. And if you don't, it's all right. We're going to be going live the next weekend anyway, so you can catch that one as well. Don't forget also to hit that like button and also hit that subscribe button if you guys are new here. And with that, have a great fucking day.